Happy Friday, 5th grade. So if you remember, we are going to talk about Women's History Month starting in March, which is on Monday. And if you remember, the theme for this year of Women's History Month is women's suffrage. Okay. And so today what we're going to talk about is a little bit of the history of women's suffrage. It's a very important history of our country. We will talk about it today. All right. So first thing that we need to do is define the word suffrage. So if you remember from what we talked about on Wednesday, you'll remember that we talked about how suffrage does not mean to suffer. Okay, I know that kind of sounds like those two words are the same, but they're very different. Suffering means you are in pain, you are in agony, things are bad. Suffrage is a good thing. Okay, suffrage is the right to vote. That's all it is. Okay, so in this country right now, to get suffrage, you have to turn 18, you have to be a citizen, or there are other ways you can vote as well, but suffrage just means the right to vote. You are able to vote in elections for a lot of things. It could be for the president, it could be for people that are running your local government, people like the governor of Minnesota, could be even for school board people. Sometimes we do even student council elections. Suffrage is just the right to vote. Okay, but mostly what we're talking about here is elections and voting for the government. Okay, so whether that's local around here in St. Paul or in our country in Washington, D.C. That's what suffrage means. Okay, so an introduction to voting in the USA. Very quick. We will talk much more about this, especially this first point here later in the year when we get closer to the end of April and May. We'll talk more about this, but I just want to start with an introduction about how voting works in the United States. So, our Constitution, again, this is something that we will talk a lot about. I am going to give you a Constitution, okay? I have a little pocket Constitution that I will give out to you that you can have to keep. It is pretty much the rules of our country. It's how our government, our nation was set up, how it's organized, who's in charge of who, what are the rules, what are the things that happen in case, hey, what happens if a president dies, right? Then there are all these rules in the Constitution to talk about what happens next, okay? We created ours in the year 1787, so a long time ago, about 230 some years. I don't know exactly the math. That's why Mr. Linda's not your math teacher. But over 200 years ago. Okay, so it's been a long time. But these are our rules. It's called the Constitution. Okay? And when our Constitution was created, it was made so that only white men could vote all the way until 1870. Okay, so almost 100 years, you can see, in our country, in the United States of America, where we have always been the country of freedom and, democracy and all of those things. But for almost 100 years, only white men could vote until 1870. Okay. Then, after 1870, so yes, it was not just only white men could vote, but it wasn't a lot better. After 1870, only men could vote. Okay, so the definition of who could vote, who had suffrage, it turned into only white men to all men, right? So it didn't matter your race. If you were a man, you were able to vote as long as you made enough money. So there were a lot of other bad things as well that were going on. But at this time, after 1870, no woman in the United States could vote. Didn't matter who you were. You could not vote. Okay, so they decide, you know what? Women in this country, and some men too, of course, but definitely most women, they decided, you know what? There needs to be change. There needs to be change. Okay? This is not right. We are citizens just like you are. We deserve the same rights as men. Okay? So when we're talking here about when they finally do get the right to vote, women can vote today, of course, but we will talk about that here in a couple slides. When they finally get the right to vote, they had actually been fighting for it for over 100 years, okay? Even before the time of Abraham Lincoln, women had been trying to get the right to vote. They've been fighting for suffrage for over 100 years, okay? But there was a problem, right? Our Constitution, there are rules. It's very hard to change the rules. And so to change the Constitution, what you need to do is you need to create this thing called, oops, spelled it wrong, an amendment. Okay, so to change the Constitution, you need to create an amendment. All right, now again, the Constitution, amendments, all of the rules of our country, we'll talk more about that, like I said, at the end of the year. But what an amendment is, a change or addition to the rules. Okay, so amendments we have those in our Constitution when we feel like what we have inside of our rules is not enough. We need to add something to it. Okay, one of the amendments was we needed to get rid of slavery, right? That can't exist anymore. I believe it was the 13th Amendment that got rid of slavery, and so we needed to have that change in our Constitution, that was not going to exist anymore. Okay, there's quite a few amendments. There's some, the first 10 amendments, the first 10 additions to the Constitution, they're called the Bill of Rights. Those are kind of the most important ones, the ones you see all the time, like the freedom of speech, freedom. There's a lot. We'll talk more about them later in the year, but the women here, they needed to make an amendment so that they could vote, because in the Constitution it said they couldn't. So there are a couple very important people in this process that really helped kind of push forward women's suffrage. Okay, first person, her name was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and she was the founder. She was the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Okay, that's kind of a mouthful. It's a lot of words, but really what this is was a group of women who were all around the country that worked to gain the right to vote for women. Okay, they're mostly women. I would say probably 95%. There may be a few men here and there, but it was a women group working for women to help women gain the right to vote. Okay, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the first president of that group. Okay, so we're going to jump over here to Google, and we're going to look up Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and we are going to grab a picture. All right, so there's some pictures here that are younger, some that are older. This was in the 1800s, the late 1800s, after the Civil War, so 1860s and 70s, around the time of Abraham Lincoln. So I'll grab this one here. Looks a little younger. Copy that image. Paste it. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So I want you to grab a picture as well. Doesn't matter which one you want to do. Doesn't matter where you put it, as long as you know that this is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Okay. All right. She is a very important person, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for women's rights and women's suffrage. The next person, though, is maybe more famous. Susan B. Anthony is somebody who was an activist for women's suffrage, and an activist is somebody who wants change. Okay, so you can see activists today in the United States, people who want things to change, to be better. So she was somebody who wanted to change for women's voting, okay, for women's suffrage. So, like I said, it's not that either one is more important, but I would say Susan B. Anthony is somebody who I would say most people know her name. I'm hoping that after today you'll remember her name, Susan B. Anthony. She was a big-time activist. She went all around the country to help people really understand, how important women's suffrage was. Okay? You can see she has her own Who Was book. Love those books. Okay. You can see she was also part of I believe this is the dollar coin, which is very cool. So she is very much a important person. Okay. Okay. Let's grab one of these pictures here. Let's grab this one. Looks like it's a painting, but it's in color. So grab that one. Copy image. And then we will paste. Okay, put it right there. And there's Susan B. Anthony. Okay, so she was an activist for women's suffrage. She believed that women and men deserved the same rights. Okay. right, let's move on down here to slide number 5, last one for today. So here's how it happened. Okay, here is how it happened. Now, we talked about how women believed that they were the same as men. Why do they get to vote and we don't? Doesn't make sense. Okay? In kind of a sad way for me, and I think looking back on it today, it's kind of a sad thing. But women decided, you know what, we've been arguing for 100 years that we are the same as men, and it hasn't worked. So we need to do, so these activists, these people that want to change, activists, the activists argued they needed equal rights, not because they were the same, but because they were different. They would actually add morality. So morality is like knowing what's right and wrong. So they're saying that, you know what, men, I know you don't want us to vote. We agree. We're not the same as you. Okay? We're different. We're going to add something new to politics. Okay? So yes, you don't want us to vote. And we think that we are the same. We are equal to you. But sure, we're not. We're just going to add something different to politics. And that actually made a lot of people agree. They said, wow, that's actually really good. I like that. I think that we should give women the right to vote. Okay, so I don't think that's the best way to go about it. I think that it would have been better to argue that they are, neither men nor women are better than the other. We're equal and we should have the same rights. But I do understand that they just needed the right to vote, and they had to do whatever they needed to do. Okay, and then finally in the year 1920, okay, so exactly 101 years ago, the 19th Amendment was passed, allowing women to vote. Okay, so 101 years ago, I mean, that's a long time ago, but there are still people in this world that are over 101 years old, that were born before women could even vote, which is crazy to think about. Okay, so the 19th Amendment, like we said, that change, that addition to the Constitution was finally added. It was the 19th change or addition, and that is all about, if we look up the exact definition here of what the 19th Amendment says. Okay, 19th Amendment says the right of citizens, so us, people that live in the United States, to vote, so our right to vote, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. So gender is what we're talking about. So really, if we're trying to translate this into everyday vocabulary, we would say our right to vote as citizens cannot be taken away from us because of our gender. Okay? All right, so that was Amendment 19th Amendment. And we can see, actually it looks like it was 1919 is when it was finally brought up by the House of Representatives, but then it was actually ratified in 1920. So 1919, 1920, but that's what that is all about. Okay. Now what I want to do is I'm going to look up an image here. Okay, I want you to do this as well. There's a lot of pictures that you can see from the 19th Amendment. Okay. I am going to pick, I just like these ones where they're holding signs out. These activists here that want change, right? Equality for women, votes for women, give us the vote now. I love those. So I'm going to grab one of these here, copy image. You can grab any picture that you want for 19th Amendment. You can see that this is the final vote here. And you can see too, this is another thing that's very important. These are some states that already allowed it. Okay? So in these states, if you're a woman, you could vote, right? You can see this is before 1920. This is in the 1800s, some of these states. Okay, you can see that Minnesota is not on here. There's a lot of states out here in the West that already said that, yes, if you're a woman, you could vote. But this was the first time in the United States that it didn't matter what state you're in, you had to allow women to vote, which was a big thing. Okay, but I grabbed that picture, so I am going to go put it down here underneath that last bullet point. You can pick any picture that you want, that you feel represents the 19th Amendment, and put it down below. Okay, so that is women's suffrage. That is the theme for this year's Women's History Month. We will talk more about it here in the next coming weeks. Office hours today at 10:05. Otherwise, I will see you at our normal meet time, and adios.